Hello, ho, ho, and welcome to Off the Track. My name is Peter, and welcome to our Christmas special episode for 2024. Not 5, I was about to say 5. It's our 5-year anniversary this year, can you believe it? And today we're going to be discussing one of the biggest changes in the competition's history. But before we dive into that, joining me today is Mazen.
Hello there, I'm Mazen from Clad Racing and a Saudi team who made it to the World Finals.
Excellent. Rory?
I'm Rory. I competed with Feabhas Racing back in 2022.
Jenson?
Hello, I'm Jenson. I competed with Constellation at the 2023 World Finals.
Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm probably best known these days for Off the Track, but I was part of Precision Racing and Infinitude.
Ben?
Hello, my name is Ben, two-time retired Off the Track producer and from Ascension in 2019.
And last but not least at all, George.
Hi, I'm George. I competed same World Finals as Ben with Evolve UK.
Just had a bit more success.
Yeah, and as a world champion.
And we won overall, so there you go.
Yeah. Excellent. So, in the past few days, F1 schools have announced that they'll be dropping the F1 branding from the competition's name, and they're going to be rebranding to STEM Racing. Mazen, you competed at this year's World Finals. What do you think of the new brand?
I absolutely love it. I think it was a necessary change. And in fact, first, this wasn't the first opinion that I had. But when I really gave it a second and ignored people's opinions for a sec, and I looked at it, new branding is exactly the energy, the vibe that this competition is. The name F1 in schools, the logo itself was, in lack of a better word, it was kind of boring. Some people knew F1 itself, but just the color red and the white, and it was just that plain. It's not on the same level of energy, of the vibe, the excitement that you can see in the new rebrand, from the colors, from the bold font, and I think that's exactly what this competition needs. And I'm sure there's been lots of back and forth on this, and I've got some extra points to share later on. But that's my initial statement.
Interesting. There's been quite a bit of, let's say, backlash on social media after the announcement, and there's a lot of comments on Instagram saying, it will make it harder for teams to obtain sponsorships. Do we think that will be the case, Jenson?
Absolutely. When you're having discussions with potential sponsors, particularly in an environment where you're competing with programs in Australia from across a wide range of areas, including sports, science initiatives, public speaking initiatives, just areas that I'm aware of, having the allure of something like F1, which is now, with the help of Liberty Media's branding and programs such as Network's Drive to Survive, a really well-known household name and sport, it becomes easier to convince these companies that you're a case worth putting money into, compared to just another STEM program, which is tending to become the buzzword of this decade in education.
Does anyone have any comments to add to that?
I mean, I think STEM is absolutely a buzzword for this decade, and it's getting a bit tired. But at the same time, the F1 in schools was also getting tired, and it kind of sounds like the whole program is run by F1 management, which in reality it isn't. And so I feel like in terms of getting sponsorship, it kind of might have the reverse effect of, well, as a team, the sponsors look at us and go, well, why do you need money? But it's also not as descriptive as STEM racing, because if you look at what maybe big companies want to put money into when it comes to education initiatives, STEM is one of the ones that they are still very much wanting to put stuff into, and then the racing describes what the competition actually is. So I think there's two sides to that particular coin.
I agree with what Michael had to share, but did you want to say something, Peter?
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I've had lots of meetings with many sponsors. It was my responsibility. And actually, I was talking with a big company, an electric company coming up here in Saudi. And I told them the name F1 in schools. And this was a long time ago. And a big reason for why they couldn't continue with us was because of the association with F1. They told me that we're an electric brand. What we're doing is completely against this petrol and all of this carbon emissions and stuff. And it might not be the right move to go with you guys right now. Now, that was a rejection that I got because of the name. But the benefit of STEM racing is also the accessibility of the name. More people know what STEM is. It's more of a term that's thrown around, more broad. It is a buzzword. And that's what makes it a lot of an easier grab to get people's attention in comparison to F1. F1 has a large audience, but it's not that easy to grab onto. Like I personally never watched F1. I was not really interested in the F1 factor. But when you say the word STEM racing, I think it's an easier way to market it, a better way to market the competition. After all, you wanted to get as much attention to help as many people. The more people that compete, the more people that learn, and the greater impact. And I think that's a main motive and a result that we will see in the future with the STEM racing brand.
I can certainly see exactly where you're coming from. I go into the competition with the only sort of exposure I had to Formula One was, growing up with Daniel Ricciardo being a relatively known name within Australia. And that was my entire experience with Formula One in general. And I knew about F1 schools solely from the competition itself and not because of its partnership with Formula One. But I can also certainly see the value in having the Formula One badge attached to the competition as well. Formula One is such a recognizable brand, and having that badge there, I think certainly gave the competition a level of prestige that STEM racing doesn't quite reach. Like Jenson and Michael said, STEM is becoming a bit of a buzzword. I think racing isn't all too descriptive. But I think a rebrand certainly won't hurt the competition nearly as much as what was initially outraged.
I completely
tend to agree with that. The rebrand itself isn't terrible at all by any means. It's a fantastic logo. As was mentioned, it allows a lot more accessibility into the competition. It creates an independent factor for Denford. But when you're attached with the name of F1, and then you're in all essences being relegated to having the phrase supported by F1, it will ultimately, no matter which way you look at it, reduce the intake of students competing, because it's an undisputable fact that knowledge for F1 has increased since many of us started competing. The interest that students have and hold on to is the possibility of making it to real-world F1 and working in the industry. That if you were to present this to an impressionable 12-year-old in Year 7 starting out in the competition who knows of F1, and presented it as STEM racing, there might not be that instant link, which is, hey, if I keep going at this, I can make it to a world final and really take the next step into real world industry, which for many kids like myself, that was something of a dream, working in the real world of Formula One.
George, as someone who's heading in that direction, what do you think of that?
I think Jenson had a good point there. That I think the big loss is that future intake of students, because it is just a less catchy name, and it's not directly. It doesn't show you directly where it can take you. And true, when I came into the competition, I just did it because I thought, well, this looks interesting. I wasn't particularly interested in Formula One at the time, and then my interest in Formula One grew during the course of competing. But I do think it was the name F1 in schools is very good, and it's when I was at on my placement year last year at Red Bull, people did know what F1 in schools was. It was something they considered. People went from my department went to national finals to talk up on stage, the UK national finals, to talk up on stage about it and encourage people to do it. And I think there is a good connection, at least within the teams, and it is true that people care about it. And I was at a McLaren assessment day the other day, and the person leading the assessment was Randy Singh from McLaren, who was at almost every World Finals. And like, there was like a speed dating interview bit, and the first bit was like, of everyone was like, "I could just walk me through your CV." And F1 in schools is just like a great way of starting it off. And so it's a shame that you won't have that direct connection to Formula One. I mean, I know it says supported by Formula One, but it's not like, that's not going to appear on, you're not going in an interview, you're going to say, "Oh, yes, I competed in STEM racing, supported by Formula One." So it loses that recognition, which I think is a shame.
Does it lose that recognition though? Because if you consider, you say F1 in schools, and then almost every single time I've said it to someone who isn't already in the STEM space, in the STEM teaching space or something like that, I've had to explain what F1 in schools is. Is the value not in what the program is, less than the actual connection with F1?
I would say that when you have a limited amount of time to describe what you are doing, such as the case in a sponsorship interview, in, as you mentioned, George, a really quick meeting with people who might have a broader knowledge of what it is generally, but more often than not, when you're just talking to someone really quickly about it, being able to describe it as a miniature F1 competition and link it to that through the name, instead of saying, "Oh, we're competing in a STEM program called STEM Racing that is basically like F1, the appeal factor instantly drops. It instantly wanes. And in all intents and purposes, there's going to be a loss of interest that comes about from this name, not from the people competing in the program, because ultimately nothing's going to change for us, but for those outside, stakeholders who sit outside of the realm from those who know everything about the internal aspects of the competition. And it can only really be negatively impacting those quick, meaningful discussions through people who have the knowledge of what Formula One already is.
I have a question. And I'd like to direct this one to you, Mr. Jenson, since I see you gave it a great description. And if you could really shortly describe, what is F1 in schools? Just one sentence. Try to give it the shortest description. What is F1 in schools?
F1 in schools is a shrunken down version of real world F1, where team members partake in every role that a real F1 team would satisfy.
All right, and I think I agree with that. Now, if I were to ask you, describe STEM racing.
Well, I haven't competed in it yet, but I feel that to address that first, you would have to address what STEM racing is. Whereas with F1 in schools, if you noticed, I immediately linked to F1 in my sentence. So STEM racing is basically like F1, where students in school will compete in a program that emulates F1. But F1 in schools has the two main factors of this competition in the name, F1 and schools. We already know it's about Formula One. We already know it's about students. STEM racing, number one, the majority of people don't really know what STEM is, and how can we link it to racing? What kind of racing? F1 in schools is an F1 program based in education. STEM racing is a buzzword and a verb.
Okay, I'm going a bit of back and forth here. You've said that not many people know STEM racing, but it's a buzzword, or not many people know STEM, but it's also a buzzword. And honestly, when you look at the name STEM racing and that it's also supported by F1, I think it gives you the permission to say pretty much the same exact description that you have for F1 as well, F1 in schools. So if someone were to ask me, what is STEM racing? I'd probably go with the same description you gave it, or you gave F1 in schools. It's a miniature F1. It's a competition where you make a miniature F1 car, where you work in a team with other students. And then seeing that it's coming from me, let's say in a sponsorship meeting, they would get the idea that it's also students. So I believe the concept of, yes, the name has changed. I don't think it's going to make it harder to explain, but in some ways, it might make it even easier and more streamlined, simply because simpler words, and it's a lot broader. You get where I'm going with this one?
Actually, I kind of do. If you simply just said STEM racing is a competition that is supported by Formula One, I think it would pretty well fit that sentence. But I think it's more so where Jenson comes from is that it's the initial picture of Formula One as well that helps with that overall description. So although I can see where you're coming from, Mazen, where you've got, the description doesn't change. The competition is the exact same and always will remain the same. But it's the initial imaging of Formula One that makes it just a little bit more attention grabbing. I think Formula One is undeniably a stronger brand. And of course it is. It's $1 million brand. It has to be eye-catching. It has to be the thing that grabs you. But, I think that we've explained, between all of us, we've explained what F1 schools is enough times to be able to rattle that off in our sleep. I think it won't change in terms of saying STEM racing instead of F1 schools, because we're constantly explaining what the competition is anyways. Because you say, I competed in F1 schools. Great, what's that? That's always the next question.
You just find and replace F1 and schools and replace it with STEM racing, and it's functionally not that much different. Rory, do you have any thoughts on the new brand?
Just from listening to everybody, there's a few little bits. So based off what George was saying when he was dealing with McLaren in an interview, and they had a general idea of what Formula One in schools was, simply because of the slight connection there and whatever. In my own experience dealing with jobs and whatever, having the buzzword of Formula One as an engineering student, regardless if it was with McLaren or sitting back when I was 16 years old in my school doing it, it's a big catch for I've found with employers. I sit down, it's usually the first question that kind of comes is, so tell me more about this Formula One thing, and then I have to go a bit like, you need to slow down a bit, it's a toy car, but it was still cool. Whereas this is the bit I don't like about it. Well, one of the bits I don't like about it is, I'm not changing it on my CV. When you change it to STEM racing, it's going to be like, all right, like, I'm not sure, some of you may be aware of something called BT Young Scientist or something like that. I know they do it in Europe anyways. We do it here in Ireland. It's a thing everybody does it when they're 16. Some people, it's a bit of a lottery whether you get to progress to the finals or not. It's how they do it. So like, there's a lot of people who'll have, I was in BT Young Scientist, but like, it's at the point where people are like, all right, yeah, sound, but unless you won, it don't really doesn't matter a whole lot. And I feel like when you say, I competed in STEM racing, like, okay, another one of these initiatives they've brought in. Here in Ireland, we have a thing called transition year. So it's kind of like a gap year in the middle of school, where you go from like the junior part of the school to the senior part, but it's not an academic year. It's a year where you do work experience, competitions like BT Young Scientist and Formula One happen. And so a lot of people will have the opportunity to do stuff like this. It's how we always have a lot of teams in Ireland, because there's 16-year-olds with nothing better to be at. And that's how it happens. So on top of that, then, I know, at least in Ireland anyways, the competition's going to take a big hit. There's only been a couple of schools, I'm lucky enough to come from one of them, where there's a consistent Formula One drive, like a Formula One schools / STEM racing drive. Outside of that, there's not really. It's usually what happens is a bunch of, usually boys, the odd time you'll have like an all-girls school getting involved. Rarely we have mixed teams getting involved, and they get involved because it's Formula One, and then they kind of go from there and learn about the competition. They come in with zero prior knowledge of like what's required and what the competition is, and kind of learn as they go. I've mentored a few teams now. It's the same story every year. Like, say by December, like they don't have a notion really what's going on. It's not until after regionals do they start to kind of fully get into what it is, and I think competition will take an even further hit because of it.
one of the comments we got on our Instagram was, this is the final nail in the coffin for the competition, especially given the news with REA and the lack of funding there for the competition in Australia. Do we think that's a bit overblown?
Yes.
Absolutely.
No.
Oh,
No.
Oh.
Okay. Michael, do you want to go? And then Jenson.
Well, for it to be the final nail in the coffin, you'd need something that would actually stop the competition from going forward. And it is, by and large, exactly the same people running the competition. It's just a different name. And so maybe it's the start of a decline, if we're looking at final nail in the coffin type stuff. But I don't think that this signals that the end is nigh for the competition.
Jenson.
I think of course, this is all based on assumptions that I'm making that there's a strong intake of students in this competition that are coming for the name value of Formula One. Because, as I've mentioned, the growth in the brand of Formula One has gone into all areas of our society. Pretty much everyone now knows about Formula One. This competition thrives on registration fees, which ultimately comes from students being interested in participating. If one of the deciding factors in students wanting to compete is the name F1, which I would contend it is, and students therefore won't be interested in competing anymore, then this will begin a cycle of deterioration in the competition where student numbers drop. We get to a situation where competitions are run on a really bare bones basis, like they're being run in Australia at the moment. And there is this possibility of this being the final nail in the coffin for F1 in schools or STEM racing. Ultimately, though, it could be the opposite. It could be an opportunity for the competition to springboard, create greater connections with Formula One, which the founder of Denford and founder of F1 in schools is contending it will. But it could also be an opportunity to connect more into Formula SAE or other programs that really build on F1 in schools but aren't closely related to it at the moment. I'm of the belief that this could go either way, possibly leaning towards the negative. Again, that comes from my assumption that most students currently participating in the program through the current cycle of students are in it for the connection to F1.
I think Formula One's grown, and well, not just grown, but exploded in popularity over the past few years, especially because of that, drive to survive effect. And I think F1 in schools has benefited massively from that because a lot of people and a lot of students have grown their interest in Formula One. Then they've heard of their school offering this thing called F1 in schools. That sounds cool. I'm interested in Formula One, so let me join F1 in schools. Whether that's going to have an impact on the uptake of the competition in future years, who knows? Hopefully it won't, because the competition's amazing. But yeah, that remains to be seen.
It's still supported by F1 in schools, and it's not barring anyone from describing the cars as miniature F1 cars, because when you think about how students choose these subjects, you usually have a list of subjects that you're given you can choose from, at the end of a year for the next year, and there's a description for each. And you see STEM racing, that's already it's somewhat catching. Like if you like F1, you're like, STEM racing, what's that? And if you read and the first line is, in this subject, students create a miniature F1 car or something like that. Sure, the name isn't super catching, but you can bolster it with other descriptors as well. So,
Jenson.
Just from my experiences this year, starting a junior school competition for 10 and 11-year-olds, running Paper Cut Challenge, the connection there hasn't really been for anything other than Formula One of students participated. Selective basis, as things are at Brighton Grammar. It's an extracurricular program. It's not run as a subject. From the experience I've gathered in running that program, alongside being part of school tours for new and incoming students, the F1 factor is what brings students in. And I keep reiterating the same point here. It is this connection with F1 that's bringing student numbers up. We might not see an impact of this in the next year, 2 or 3, but when the current cycle of students participating, as you are, Mazen, at the moment, drops off, and we begin that next generation, which some of us are well past now, we might see, and I would contend we will see, a deterioration in student numbers participating.
I'd like to
I
take
think ultimately it's.
Go ahead.
No, you
Go
go,
ahead,
Rory. No, let me voice rest. I'll let you go.
All right, it was me, unless Rory said anything. Oh,
No,
Oh,
Mazen-
sorry.
Mazen,
Sorry,
you
I
go.
can't hear.
no problem. Let me give an example or like the scenario of what happened for our cycle at least. Since you're talking, Mr. Jenson, about the deterioration of how many students are joining in, right? And let's say for my team, 2 out of the 6 people only actually liked F1, or 3. And then the rest kind of just got along with the flow, similar to what Mr. George was also talking about, how his interest grew throughout his experience in the competition. And from the other teams in the city, I can't say I saw more than 5 out of 40 students actually interested in F1. Interested as in they watch the races. Now, the factor of the number of people applying, sure, the number of people interested in F1 might increase or decrease, but applying to the program, I don't think will go any further or go any lower, simply because the rebranding allows them to market it to a much larger crowd. I mean, look at the most recent video or Instagram reel that the F1 in Schools STEM Racing account posted. The most engagement they've gotten, 800 likes, and of course some angry comments, but it's clearly showing it's easier to market. You're still showing the excitement of the competition, you're still showing the miniature F1 cars, and that's what's going to grab people's attention. The name is the door, but as soon as they open the door and show the world what's behind it, that's why people are entering. The name sure will grab the attention of a few people, but when people see what's behind it and see the excitement and hear the word of mouth of how the competition actually works, I'm sure even more people will be applying and competing.
And you
I'd be
have to ask
interested to know,
yourself. Sorry, Jenson.
do you think that that perspective is different based geographically? Of course, you're based out of Saudi Arabia. Is the perception there in relation to F1 perhaps lower than somewhere like Australia, and particularly where I come from in Melbourne, where we've had a Grand Prix every year since I can remember, since I was born, well and truly? F1 is well and truly synonymous here, and I'd say it's more well known in Australia than somewhere like Saudi Arabia, where races have only been happening since 2021. Do you think that, as you mentioned, getting to that door before even opening it, do you think that more people with a knowledge of F1 are going to fall off the path, so to say, than those who don't really know F1 based on geographical location being able to open up and see what's inside? Is that your experience of it?
Lots of people, like you've said, here in Saudi don't really know F1. It's still pretty new. And we've seen a large number of people applying to the competition. The way people apply for this competition is a bit different. So across the country, I've heard at least last year is around 3,000 students applied to the competition. Only a few hundred were accepted. Now, when I go back to the point of marketing it, I think this also helps with how the people in Australia, for example, perceive it. Lots of people there see F1 as something very common. It happens a lot there. Lots of people talk about it. And then when you market the STEM racing competition aggressively or passionately and connect it with the F1 title that it's still rightfully connected to, lots of people will still fall in love with the competition. It's still connected to F1. And with this accessibility and how you can market it, I strongly believe Danford will be able to capitalize on these passionate F1 viewers in Australia, in Saudi, in any other country in the world.
And that's what it is, isn't it, though? It's the passion, though, isn't it? Like, the passion that the student has for F1 is based on liking racing, based on liking, yes, particularly F1 racing. But if the people that have been doing it for so many years are doing it because they're passionate about designing cars, the name under which they do that is not going to make a massive difference to them if that's their passion. Jenson?
I absolutely agree with you. And as I've mentioned now, it makes no difference to us. It makes no difference to, I'd say, 99% of people who are going to watch this episode, because we know that F1 in schools, as it is, doesn't matter the name on it, doesn't matter who's in charge of it, as long as the principles that have been in place for the last 20 years are still in place. We can race a car, we make a portfolio, we turn up to a regional final, state final, national final, world final, and do our thing, we'll be fine. My whole perception is based on an impressionable student who wants to do something with their spare time. They have the option, particularly in Australia, of perhaps pursuing a sporting path or pursuing a path in something like this extracurricular-wise. Mazen, your argument's based around opening that door, being able to get in that door and see what's inside. Doesn't matter what's on the door. What I'm saying is that for a student who has no knowledge of F1 in schools, who doesn't have people who've competed in it beforehand, who doesn't have a teacher who's really excited about it, someone who's in a school that's just starting out in it, how are they going to know what this program is about if F1 in schools, an F1 program run in an education perspective, isn't on there? As we've seen, the supported by F1 branding is really small. As I mentioned, it's essentially a relegation for the F1 headline on it. What if that drops off one day? Is STEM racing just going to become another program run by schools to entice students to spend a little bit of extra time doing education outcomes, instead of being that really fun program that we know isn't just about racing a car, but is about building a team, writing portfolios, getting connections with stakeholders in and outside of the competition? What if that all drops off and we're there to tell these new students this is something fun to do? How will they know that this is what we know it is?
That's some very well made points, and I think we're going to cut that there because it's getting a little on the circular side. Really good discussion, but yeah. Peter, did you have anything to add?
I was going to say, I think one of the points we sort of communicate when it comes to branding is that, a brand is much more than a name and a logo. This brand is 3-4 days old as of recording.
Yeah.
We have yet to see what else, this brand develops into. So it's this is very, very initial judgment that we're passing here. But again, on Jenson's point about, how will students know, how wonderful this competition is, that will have to come from the communication of the brand and, how they market it, which I'm sure they'll do a great job of doing. But again, we haven't seen that. So let's see, what 2025 holds in store for the competition. Some countries will keep using F1 in schools until the end of their competition season. But some countries are going straight into STEM racing, and we'll see which ones are doing what shortly. But yeah, no, I think next year is going to be interesting. Rory, did you have a point? Sorry, did I?
Yeah.
Did you try to come in? No. Oh.
The other bit was something, there's a phrase Mazen used that I liked a lot, was opening the door. So in my experience with procuring sponsorship here, the trick was getting in the door. And the best way to get in the door was the battering ram of Formula One, because it had just taken off when I got going. Drive to Survive had just happened. Ireland, we don't have a Grand Prix. We are not a massive Formula One nation. We might have been back in the 90s or so when Eddie Jordan was kind of firing around or whatever. But since then it's kind of dropped off. And even then, I don't know if he has the best reputation or whatever as before my time. So the best way to get in the door before was genuinely the Formula One schools. Because otherwise I'm like, Harriet, I'm STEM racing. I have a 20 centimeter long toy car. I need 20 grand to go to, in my case it was going to be Melbourne, so I needed 25 actually. So Harriet, I need 25 grand to go to Melbourne with a toy car. Or myself, 6 lads and 2 teachers, and I swear it's not a lad's holiday. That was the tricky part, was you got in the door and then you had to sell it. So now, whereas with STEM racing, you're showing up and you have to sell yourself before you're even in the door. And then you get in the door and you're like, yeah, I know it's a toy car, but I really need at least $1,000 here. And I personally think, from my experience, because I think you guys have all had easier times than I had getting sponsorship from the sounds things, because it was tooth and nail to get €50 off people. So Like, I'm pretty sure if COVID hadn't happened, I wouldn't have been able to go. Pros and cons to that. But I feel like that's going to be the biggest killer down the line in countries, not just for the students, but for the schools. Because they'll go on and they'll start, it was hard enough already to get sponsorship for a toy car with the Formula 1 badge at the front. And I think now that it's, we're STEM racing, supported by Formula 1, I think you give it 5-6 years, at least I can say comfortably in this country. Because there's only so many companies that sponsor and whatever. They're just going to be like, well, this isn't cool. There's other stuff, other STEM initiatives that are less tired that we can put money into. This is just STEM racing. First thing, all of us, seriously now, when you hear the word STEM racing, what is the first thing you think of? For me, it's a lump of celery with wheels on it. I kind of think that's a killer as well. The Formula 1 in schools, it like, by God, they don't know it's a toy car. As far as they're concerned, it's like Formula Student. I feel like when I heard about the rebrand, I was like, okay, the only way they can not really make a mess of this is call it Formula Schools. Because that you keep the tie-in with Formula Student, the engineering companies that might sponsor that are aware of Formula Student, the motorsport companies that would have like pipelines with Formula Student. It's like another step in that direction. I feel like STEM racing is a bigger tangent that will ultimately like spin out by itself.
George, you were nodding along there. Did you think there was an opportunity for them to use a better name?
Yes. First of all, I'd just like to say I think Rory's point that the F1 name helps to justify some of the exuberant spending that teams have, and I think it does help justify that. But yeah, I think Rory is definitely right with Formula Schools would have been a much better name because it does tie into Formula Student, Formula 1, and as far as I know, like Formula 1 wouldn't have any ability to like any naming rights over that. And there was I did Google it, there was some competition called Formula Schools based in the UK, which I think involved basically RC racing cars. But it looks like their last event was in 2012. So I'm sure that could have been dealt with in terms of buying the naming rights off of them all. I don't really know how any of that works, but I'm sure it probably would have been worth the cost to do that from what I think would have been a better name. Because you still get that instant link to Formula 1 in your head. But
it kind of makes it sound even more like a Formula competition because you've got Formula SAE, Formula 3, that's a thing still, right? Formula 2, you know, it seems like just an early stage of that progression.
Yeah, and that's what I meant by it's its own tangent now. I feel like it's never mind like when I got into competition, I didn't like know I wanted or had an idea to work in motorsport. And then from doing competition I was like, okay, that's an avenue of work I'd be interested in. It's like I'm currently working on a mechanical engineering degree. I'm on placement next year, and by God, will I be applying to every Formula 1 team and every Formula team there is to try to get in. But I feel like that it makes it a touch easier when you have that Formula connection. And now it's STEM racing, and here if you go immediately to your left, there's the Formula stuff. But we're on our own path now, and as someone has said, brand is 3 to 4 days old. Let's see what they do with it. But it's important for the competition and the students' sake. It's important that they do something with it, because if they leave it as it was 2 weeks ago, Formula 1 in schools, and now we're just STEM racing, I feel we'll see the knock-on effects. Whereas they can be STEM racing and take that another direction, and it can be their own direction if they want, because they don't have the moniker Formula 1 anymore. The Halo is a fantastic introduction, I think. But again, that came in because we're tied with Formula 1 in schools. So now we're STEM racing. It is broader. There are no new opportunities with it. But I feel those opportunities have to be seized upon and quickly, and not left like sitting in a boardroom or however it works for the next 2.5 years, because I think we will start to see like the plummet. We already saw this year for a lot of schools pulling out of the World Finals for financial reasons. I know 2 schools here in Ireland did. 1 or 2, anyways. Definitely 1. And they were a new team. They were a team who'd never been to a World Finals before. And I was actually really excited. I was dealing with them at the national finals. And they were asking me, what's the most important thing now for the World Finals? And I just said to them, money. You can have the fastest car, you can have the best portfolios, but if you can't go, you can't go. And yeah, that kind of happened. So I feel like it's important STEM racing does its own thing, and that students are able to capitalize and profit is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Like profit off STEM racing's new direction. Because otherwise, yeah, they'll be in a bigger hole.
I think the team that they have, what is it, STEM Racing Global? That's what they're calling HQ these days. I don't think there's a better team to start this rebrand and to make it into its own thing. I think they've got a great team. I think that Andrew, Nelson, and the rest of the team got strong heads on their shoulders, and I have every confidence that by the time they've listened to this episode and realized they should have chosen Formula Schools, that's a free idea. You can have that. I'm sure the rights won't be too expensive, but if they choose not to take it, I think they'll do a great job. Yeah. Peter, any last thoughts?
Well, the one thing I saw pop up on LinkedIn was why have they done this in the first place? And
only they know.
No, I don't think we'll find out. But yeah,
if they want to come on off the track and
they already have.
Well, I'm sorry. If we want to get like more of the team on board and go a bit into more detail as to why they chose STEM Racing, all that, because I saw the Denford interview. It was a good interview. He went into the reasons, but I think there's more substance to be had there from other perspectives in the team. And so if they want to, we're more than willing to have them on. We'll smash out an episode going into the real big questions around the brand.
Look, ultimately, as Andrew mentioned in the interview, apparently this will help the competition operating. It's absolutely no secret whatsoever that this competition is very hard to operate. We've seen that with Australia recently with the complete collapse of the competition. Like, it's not a profitable competition to run.
No.
It's difficult to get going. It's difficult to hold every year. And if this brand helps that in any way, fantastic, absolutely. I think having a competition under a different moniker is certainly better than no competition at all.
Absolutely.
And now, as we've all mentioned, it's up to STEM Racing themselves, how they market this new competition and the new name, and how it's perceived as a community. However, I think also it's important that we mention Formula One themselves as well. If this competition is going to be supported by Formula One and they want to whack that on the banner, I think we need to see some actual support from Formula One. The past year has been completely lackluster from Formula One themselves. Unsure what they've provided, F1 schools at all, other than maybe tickets to a Grand Prix. But, we haven't even seen a piece of media from Formula One this year relating to the World Finals. I think I've seen more posts from Aston Martin, showing Fernando Alonso parade around the competition than I have from Formula One themselves, considering the competition had their logo. So I think although STEM Racing can do a bit with the brand, I think, as you guys said, it's a fantastic team over there. I think Formula One really need to pull their finger out.
And on that terrible disappointment, I think we've covered most of the things we wanted to cover. So anyone else got anything super pressing that they want to add before we go?
It's a really nice logo. Like I really like the logo. Very nice branding.
Insert
That's
everything else you've said on this
Yeah,
podcast
that's all.
today here.
Quick cut.
Like, it's a really nice logo. It's just put F1 in there. Just say
Let's
F1 and tools in that logo.
pop a flashback of Jenson criticizing it in after that.
It's a lovely logo. If
It's
we're
a
going to
great
speak
logo.
solely about the logo, it's really nice. Whoever they've paid to do that has done a great job.
We should do a poll on
I
Instagram,
have
Peter. Should
the
we
one
change the
question.
off the track logo to have the same gradient?
Rory.
What's going to happen with the big prize?
Oh,
That's
that's
right.
right.
Trophy.
Yeah.
it's lovely.
Oh.
New trophy time.
Do the winners
what?
get to keep it now?
Yeah, like what's going on there? I'm only looking at like Discord here on the side. I can just see the picture of the lads holding it. I was like, hang on a minute, what are they going to do with that? Because that was a good. That was a
It's going to sit in Andrew's office.
Probably, yeah.
Probably. Won't be the first time they change a trophy. I mean, we've seen a logo change within the past. When was it? 2018. They debuted the new trophy. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
that won't come as a shocker.
What's it going to be?
That's
Is it just
what I
going
mean. I
to
know
be
it
a
will
3D
change.
extrusion of
slanted
the new?
SR.
Yeah, and of the new logo, just a
Real
chunky
original.
SR.
Have the opportunity to do something really cool.
Exactly.
And as
That's what I
Mazen
was-
said, like it is a really good. My only problem with this is that F1's not involved anymore. If it was really clear that this was still F1 in schools, a brand refresh would never go wrong. But F1's not as it was anymore, and that's where my problem arises.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the issue that Ben also mentioned, is that like maybe F1 was not involved enough, so F1 as Gord Denford didn't feel like they deserved the right to stay on there anymore. I
At
wish
this
there was
point,
more
we're-
involvement.
At this point, we're just
Yeah.
speculating about what Denford thinks.
Alright.
Though.
It's a broader problem.
I'd love to, again, as you said, would be great to have them all on and actually find out. Like, I'd love to know what Nelson thinks about this. But broadly speaking, lovely logo, terrible name.
It's a broader
George.
problem, sort of, though, with motorsport, in that when you think of car racing, you think of Formula One, which is its own company. Whereas if you think of football, like, you think of, like, just football as a general sport rather than, say, the Premier League or what other leagues there are. So it's... You're
So
sort of,
what you're saying basically is Formula One is motorsport.
yeah, they've almost got a
basically,
monopoly
isn't it?
over motorsport.
Yeah.
And so you're sort of, if you want a motorsport related school engineering competition, the only sort of real good name to stick on it is Formula One, which belongs to a company. There's not like a range of companies you could be looking to for support, because you could look at, like, I don't know, World Endurance Championship, but like that's got much smaller name recognition than Formula One. So you're kind of stuck.
Even in Australia, like we used to have supercar races and Bathurst and that, and we still have them, but I don't feel like they're as big as they used to be with the exit of Holden and Ford from Australia. I know Ford hasn't fully exited, but they're really trying to. So even in Australia, where Formula One's the big motorsport thing, rallies haven't been a big thing for a long time. And the whole industry has grown substantially over, I think, the last 20 years, particularly since Drive to Survive. And it's just been F1. So, I mean, hands off to Formula One management. They pulled that one off well.
I think it's just worth saying, you know, we're having this discussion because we want the best for the competition. It's not because we want the competition to finish. No, of course, all of us want it to continue. And obviously, we're really passionate about it. That's why we're,
Absolutely.
you know, having this discussion today, because, you know, if we want to see the competition flourish into the future, and hopefully it will under the new brand. But, you know, we are speculating, really, and assuming a lot of things. So let's see what happens over the course of the next year. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say next year. But all of us, have a very Merry Christmas. Enjoy the rest of 2024, and we look forward to seeing you in 2025 with whatever we're doing, if we're still doing podcasts, or
If we're still here.
if we're still here doing something. Remains to be seen. But from all of us, goodbye.
Bye.
Hi.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.